computer.
Oh, wait, actually, if you're online. Perfect.
You ready, my dear?
So ready.
Perfect. I'm going to be on mute to start, okay?
Sure. Hello and good afternoon, folks. I see people are starting to join us, but we're sort of trickling in as it goes in the Zoom world. So please settle in. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes as people join us. Hi, everybody. And as we're jumping in here, check out your chat box, pull that up. We're going to be using it a lot today. So just open that up and go ahead and share with us your name and also one word that describes how you're feeling today. And that could be a physical word, like maybe you're hot or you're cold. It could be an emotion word, or it could be a color. Maybe I think I'm feeling purple today if I had to choose. Joya, how are you feeling?
I love that question. And hi, everyone. So excited to be with you guys today. I'm feeling orange. I'm feeling excited and vibrant and ready for the weather to change in Chicago already.
I hear you. All right. Thank you so much, folks. We have a few more people joining us. Wonderful. So as we're trickling in, remember, just open up your chat box, share with us your name, and share with us how you're feeling today. Also, feel free to be honest. I see Celie is feeling tired today. And Celie, I feel you. That makes a lot of sense. So please share however you're doing, wherever you're at today. Dominic, I'm so sorry you're sick and I hope you're feeling better soon. Peaceful. Oh, I love that. I'm going to try to absorb some of that energy from Mary. Javier is feeling good. Elena's in a good mood, a little bit tired. I hear you. Jennifer is also tired. Understood. We also have Danielle feeling energetic. So again, we're going to try to absorb some of that energy. Bless you. Thank you for sharing, folks. I'm really excited to get us started, but we are talking about poems today. So we will be talking about feelings as well. Yellow, filled with energy. Thank you for sharing that. I love this. So continue describing, thinking about how you're feeling, and we'll keep that in mind as we go forward in our workshop today. My name is Hannah, and I work at the Pulitzer Center, and I'm very excited to share the Fighting Words Poetry Contest with you today. I'm coming to you from my home in Washington, D.C., and very happy to see folks from all over the place in our meeting today. And I'm also joined by my wonderful colleague, Joya. Joya, for folks who may not have heard yet, could you let us know where you're at and what you do here?
Hi, everyone. My name is Joya. I'm based in Chicago. I'm so excited to be with you guys today. I work with the education department as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Joya. Really appreciate you being here too. And folks, continue connecting with each other. I appreciate that you're supporting and sending each other good energies in the chat. Remember, we are in a webinar today. I know everybody in this room is very familiar with Zoom, but most of the time we're in meetings and not in webinars. What it means that we're in a webinar is that we won't be able to see or hear each other today. All of your cameras and mics will be off, but we will be using this chat box to communicate. If you want a message to come through just to Joya and me, you can select all panelists on the little menu in your chat box. But if you're willing to share what you have to say with everybody, just make sure that your chat is set to all panelists and attendees. I see most people are doing that already, which is wonderful. Our main goal for this workshop, the most important thing that we're going to do today, is just to take care of ourselves and each other. I know that you are coming to this class today in a world that has a lot of things going on in it. There's a lot going on in the news, in our personal lives. So I really appreciate you taking time out, a breather, to think about underreported issues and poems together. But I also want you to be safe and comfortable for yourselves. So please do what you need to do and what is possible for you in the space you're in, whether that's taking lots of stretch breaks, looking away from your computer every now and then. I'm sitting here with my cup of tea, so grab some tea, some water, whatever is good for you. And let's make this a good and supportive space for ourselves and each other today. We're also going to be talking about how poets and journalists use words to communicate both feelings and information, making some personal connections to underreported news stories, and doing a little bit of writing practice. We will not be writing any long, epic poems in the 1 hour time span that we have together today, but you will walk away from this workshop with all of the tools that you could possibly need to sit down and write a poem in this new fighting words form after our workshop together, if you choose to do so. So how are we going to get there? This is our game plan. We're going to start with a little introduction to where Joya and I are coming from at the Pulitzer Center and how all of you are going to become a part of that community by writing your fighting words poems. After that, we'll explore an underreported news story and a poem written in response to it by a student who won this contest in a previous year. And that'll become a model or an example of how we can start writing these poems ourselves when we get into our practice session. We have curated some resources, selected some resources for us to explore together today, since we're in a large group. But this contest is also all about you finding those stories that are most interesting and important to you. So we'll talk about how you can do that, how you can find a news story that will motivate your own poem after the workshop today. So we'll get started with a little bit of an introduction to who we are at the Pulitzer Center and what we do. So the Pulitzer Center is a nonprofit journalism organization based in Washington, D.C., but working with educators, students, and journalists all over the world. And to better understand why we work with journalists and what we hope our journalism will do, we talk about two categories of news. And the first category that we like to talk about is what we refer to as breaking news, that second thing on the screen there. So could you just hop into the chat and let Joya and me know, when you hear the words breaking news, what do you think of? What would be the definition of breaking news to you? Maybe Joya, as those chats come in, could you read those out for us?
My pleasure.
Thank you.
So Caitlin says, a crisis or emergency.
That is very often the case. Thank you, Caitlin. What else?
Danielle has shared, I think of news that is new and important. Elena is sharing, it's usually news stories as they happen or immediately after happening. We're getting quite a few. I'm going to share one more. Danielle says something that happens on the news that doesn't usually happen. And we're getting quite a few more. So thanks so much for your feedback, guys.
That is awesome to hear. Thank you so much for that. And all of you are really right on. Together, we have come up with a perfect definition for breaking news. I think it was Elena who said that, that often breaking news is news that is still in development while it's happening, while it's being published, right? So breaking news are the newest news stories there are. It's something that either just happened or something that is still ongoing. And if you said that it was something important, a big crisis, something dramatic, something surprising, you're also right. Usually breaking news stories tend to look like that. Breaking news is really important. These stories often affect our communities and our own lives in really clear, direct ways. So the journalists who tell them have a very important job to do, to tell those stories quickly and to tell them accurately. But while I'm not a journalist, at the Pulitzer Center, I get to work with a lot of different journalists, and I love asking them the question, from the time when you get an assignment from an editor or somebody to tell a breaking news story, to the time when you have to turn around and publish that so that I can see it, how long do you get? So I wonder, what would you guess about how long do you think journalists usually have to tell a breaking news story? Oh, Julia says 15 minutes. What else
Elena
are we
says
seeing,
a day
Joya?
to a week. Danielle is emphasizing that they don't get too long, and Leah shared just a few hours.
Yeah, these are great answers. What I hear most of the time is that a journalist will have anywhere between 24 hours, so one day to tell a news story, or 5 minutes to turn that story around, depending on how long it's supposed to be. Maybe it's just a social media post at first and they get another hour or so to write a longer story, maybe a day to produce a big multimedia package or something like that. But they don't have a lot of time to tell these breaking news stories. You're absolutely right. So at the Pulitzer Center, although we appreciate the work that journalists do to tell breaking news stories, we instead focus on what we call the underreported story. And those are the stories that aren't getting a lot of attention in the major news headlines all the time. A lot of the time, underreported news stories wind up being the root causes of breaking news that we'll see, or there'll be stories about the consequences of a big breaking news story long after we've stopped talking about that news story in the media so much. So for example, if there's a big hurricane or a national disaster that affects a community, usually you'll hear about that in the news for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of days, depending on the severity of it. And you'll see that for a little while, but then journalists will move on to another topic. We'll start talking about something else. So we want to follow up and see how is that affecting people's lives long after the fact. So instead of working on news stories for a couple of minutes, a couple of hours, or a day or two, our journalists are working on their news stories for weeks, months, and sometimes even years. And you can imagine that those news stories look really different than they would if they were being told in a breaking news format. So the reason that I'm talking so much about breaking news and underreported stories while you're in a poetry workshop with us is that the underreported story is really at the center of a lot of what we do at the Pulitzer Center. So a big question that I want you all to keep in mind as we move forward in our workshop together today is just this. What are the underreported stories in your own life, in your community, your neighborhood, or in the wider world that are important to you and that you want to make sure get attention? So I'm curious to know what some of the issues that you're most interested in might be. Our journalists at the Pulitzer Center report on all kinds of different topics, including environment and climate change, migration and refugees, peace and conflict, racial justice, health, and many, many others. So feel free to check more than one if more than one of those apply to you. We just launched a poll for you to participate in. And also, if you're marking other, let us know in the chat, what are some of those other kinds of news stories that Joya and I haven't listed here, but that you care about? See your votes coming in. It's really interesting to see. And feel free to share in the chat as well. You can share other kinds of news stories and also more detail about the kinds of stories that you see on the screen here. And we'll close out our poll in 5 seconds. Beautiful. So it looks like a lot of people in this room care about racial justice, which I'm really glad to see. Also, people really care about everything that's on this list, it seems. That's a wonderful thing. There's a broad range of interests in this room, and also many people who checked all of the boxes, which is wonderful as well, because none of these issues exists all by itself. All of them connect with each other and interact with each other to make the world the way that it is. So none of these issues are necessarily more important or less important than any other, but it is important to start thinking about what are those issues that motivate me to write, to read, to learn, and maybe even to take action? And how can we seek those out and find out more about them? Joya, did we get any responses in the chat that we want to take a look at before we move on?
Sure. Caitlin shared that she's also interested in rural housing and education. Thank you so much for sharing, Caitlin. If anybody else in our attending group has an issue that they really care about that isn't being represented here, feel free to share it at any time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. These are just a few of the issues that journalists at the Pulitzer Center report on. And because we've been around for a long time now, working with many different journalists, I'm hopeful that all of you will be able to find a news story that speaks to you and connects to your own interests. We're not working on journalism projects together today. Instead, we're going to be taking journalism that already exists and turning it into something new through the Fighting Words Poetry Contest. So the poems that you write as part of this workshop or after today's workshop can become a poem that can be entered into this contest. And the guidelines for it are really simple. The only rules are that you use some words and phrases from an underreported news story that you find on the Pulitzer Center website, and that you write about ideas from the story that you choose. And when we say write about ideas from that story, we're talking about these big global issues like racial justice or environment and climate change or food security, any of those big global issues that motivate you. There are prizes for winners and finalists, including being published on the Pulitzer Center website, performance opportunities, up to $100, and also just entering a very cool community of young poets who have been doing this work for the last 4 years now. And the deadline to enter is Saturday, May 15th. So you have just about 3 weeks to work on your poems after this workshop and get them into us if you decide that that's something that you want to do. There's a simple Google form to submit, and we'll make sure that you have our contact information as well in case you have any questions after today. If you are finding that you have questions as we go along, please feel free to throw those into the chat or to use the little Q&A box, and we'll make sure that we get those answered too. But right now we're going to move into actually exploring an example of what it looks like when a student chooses a news story that's inspiring to them and writes a poem in response. So for that, I'm going to turn things over to Joya now.
Thank you so much, Hannah. So I'm going to launch a poll, but I'd love for you guys to vote. We are going to read a text together about one of the two topics, and then we're going to explore a poem. The first story and poem is about immigration and refugees from Honduras. And the second is a story and poem about children visiting their parents in jail or prison in the US. So I'm going to hold about 10 seconds for us to vote because I want to choose a text and an issue that is really exciting to the group here today.
And just so you know, your vote really counts because it's a close race right now that is actually at 50-50 at the moment. So get those votes in.
Now we are going to close this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, Hannah was not lying. What a close call that was. Our first story won by just a couple percentage points. So that is a story that we are going to use. Now, students that are interested in the other story, you can always find it on our website. So let's go to that next story. Wonderful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a couple of slides, some selections of the story. As you're listening to the story, I want you to think about how it makes you feel. What are the feelings that you're experiencing as you listen to the story? And what feelings do you think the people the story is about are experiencing? Okay, and before we start, I want to define some terms that some of you may know and some of you may not know. I'm actually going to pose it, I'm just going to define them. A migrant is someone who is moving from their home and they're looking for a new home. So that is what the term migrant means. Now that I've defined that term, I'm going to share this term asylum with you. I'm wondering, does anybody know what that word means? Let's share it in the chat. What might asylum mean? Maybe it's a word you have heard in the news or heard people talking about. What might asylum mean? It's a tricky word, and I'm going to share what I feel the definition is. Oh, Elena has an idea. I know what an insane, well, that's true. That's a different kind of asylum. Thank you for sharing that, Elena. Laura Axon is sharing a safe place for a migrant to stay while finding a new country to live in. Excellent definition. A place of refuge or safety. Julia, thank you so much. These definitions are perfect. And that is exactly how I would describe asylum. So let's start reading. Now, this is a selection from a story called Denied Asylum. Migrants return to a place they fear most, home, by Tim Sullivan. By now, the young couple thought they'd be in the United States, somewhere, anywhere in the United States. They thought they'd have jobs, he'd work construction, maybe she'd be a waitress. They thought they'd be safe. They thought they'd have asylum. Instead, an American judge swiftly denied their asylum requests. Immigration officials escorted the couple into an airplane packed with deportees that flew them back to Honduras, one of the world's most dangerous countries. They were home. There was nowhere more frightening.
So we know what asylum is. And now we have one more term on the screen, deportee. Joya, do you want to define that one for us?
Sure. The way that I would define a deportee is someone that is being forced to go back home or forced to leave a country that they're in. So when you see the line, the couple was escorted into an airplane packed with deportees. They're packed with other people that are being forced to leave the United States. The gangs own it, said the wife, a driven daughter of farm workers who had promised herself that she would escape working on a farm like her parents. She agreed to tell her story if her husband's name was not used. She was afraid of how the gangs would react. They own the whole place. They walk around freely. So as we're coming to the end, actually, let's answer this question. Now, the subject of this story, the wife, is afraid to be home, is afraid to go home. And I'm wondering, what makes a home dangerous? Let's look at this particular example. What is making this home dangerous? What is making going back to Honduras a challenging and scary experience for this particular couple? Danielle, thank you. Gangs are exactly what this person is describing. What are some other factors that might make a home dangerous or a place dangerous? War, thank you, Elena, thank you. War is also a factor that might make going home scary. The government, right? The government rules. Thank you so much for these thoughtful responses. Keep sharing them in the chat. We're going to continue to move on. Now, as you heard the story, as you were reading the text along with my reading, I'm wondering, what feelings did you experience when you read the story or when you listened to the story? What feelings were you having as you were listening? Share it in the chat with us. Caitlin, thank you so much for sharing. Fear, concern, sadness, frustration, those are really, some of those feelings are the feelings that I had reading it. So thank you so much for sharing that. Danielle, what a great word to use, empathy. Empathy or connecting to the emotions of the people the story was describing. Thank you so much. Laura also said empathy for the people trapped in the situation. It is certainly a challenging situation to be trapped in, and the story captures the experience of so many migrants who are looking for safety. Sahiri shared they would be scared to go back to a place they work so hard to get out of. Excellent. You guys are already jumping into our next question. What feelings do you imagine the people in the story might experience? Thank you so much. There isn't much I can say there except feeling bad because I know I will never go through with what they are experiencing. Thank you, Elena. It was kind of sad seeing people leaving their home because of fear. Nagria, I completely agree with that comment. I know, many people never want to leave home, but it's a situation or a decision they have to make for their own safety. So if there are other feelings that you're experiencing, please share them in the chat. We've already had some comments about what feelings we imagine the people in the story might experience. I wonder if we have some more ideas of what do we think the couple is experiencing? What feelings are they experiencing? We already had some great ideas. If we have any more, I'm going to hold 5 seconds for it. I noticed a lot of people saying that they were empathizing or they had empathy for the experiences they felt that our subjects or the people the story was about were experiencing. So thank you for sharing that. Caitlin is also adding anxiety, uncertainty about their future. Yes, certainly. Hopelessness, doom. Julia, great words. And certainly I think they really capture perhaps what our subjects are feeling or what I might feel in that situation. And what we're doing right now is we're connecting to those experiences. So keep sharing. I love these comments in the chat. Let's move on. So what we're going to do now is we are going to read a story together that a poem that a student wrote that was inspired by this story. Now, this student is a 6th grader from Massachusetts. And after reading this story, they wrote this poem to capture the feelings that they had while reading it, and perhaps capturing the emotions they thought the subjects were feeling. I'm going to read this poem to you guys, and what I'd love for you to do is think of 1 or 2 things. We are actually going to listen to Molly read, and while we are listening, what I'd like you to think about is, 1, do you notice words from the poem that were in the story that we just read? So if you're hearing lines or seeing lines, hold on to those. That's the first thing I want you to think about, because we're going to ask you about that. The next thing I want you to think about is, how does a poem make you feel? As you're listening to it, as you're reading along, how does it make you feel? And is the mood that it's evoking the same as the feelings that you had when we read the story? How does it change if it does? And I'd love to know whether you think this poet really captures the mood of the text. So we're going to go ahead and play this. And remember, we're looking for lines from the poem and we're looking for the mood. And then I'm going to ask you some follow-up questions. Go ahead, Hannah.
Thank you, Joya. And I will just ask you to give me a thumbs up to make sure that I've shared my sound successfully. This is Molly Blander reading her poem.
This is Home Sweet Home, an Oxymoron, a poem by Molly Blander with lines from Denied Asylum, Migrants Return to the Place They Fear Most. Home, by Tim Sullivan. Swiftly denied. Request for asylum drifts out the window like the smoke from a snuffed-out candle, along with a desperate dream for safety and stability. Rocked, collapsing, like a child walking for the first time. Walking. Grudgingly walking back to the land they hoped to escape. Gangs own it. My Honduran hometown. Murderous monopoly. No Park Avenue. No get out of jail free. The price we pay is not blue paper money. It is lives. Family. It is the place we used to call home. Fear is profitable. Gangs. Fighting endlessly. A forever fire. Burning with debt, burning with blood. Nowhere more frightening. Home.
Thank you so much. I want to give some virtual applause for Molly, wherever she is in the world. Thank you for your incredible poem. Now, attendees, I'd love to ask, did you notice lines from this poem that were in the text? What were they? What did you notice? What are some lines that were in this poem? Gangs own it, Julia, thank you. Nowhere more frightening, excellent. Those are two of the lines that she included in the poem. You got it. Thank you so much, Julia. Anyone else notice? Danielle, thank you. Swiftly denied. Yes, yes. Those are the lines that are in the poem that she used from the text. And I imagine that Molly, after she read the story, these were the lines that really resonated with her, that captured really important details and that she used to build this poem. So thank you so much for your contributions. Now we're going to go to checking in on our emotions, because as you notice, writing poetry is really about getting in touch with the way we feel and the way the language makes others feel, right? So what were your feelings as you listened to this poem? What feelings did you experience? I know that I personally was feeling kind of some of the same feelings that I had before when I was reading the text. Those feelings that many of you shared, fear, concern, sadness, frustration. I'm seeing outrage. Yes, thank you, Laura. Also concerned. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Those are great descriptions. And as you're describing them, I'm noticing that those are some of the feelings that I had as well. So it's always helpful for someone else to share their thoughts, because then I notice that those are my thoughts too. Those were my feelings. You helped me name them. Thank you. Julia says outrage, anger. Yes, anger. I'm personally feeling anger for the fact that they have to go through this. They have to experience it. Thank you so much for sharing, Julia. We're noticing that perhaps we're having some similar feelings, but also that our feelings are different now as we listen to this poem, right? I'm wondering, are there other words or other phrases in this poem that maybe weren't in the text, but really resonated with you, that you thought were really well written? I personally, one of my favorite lines from this poem, well, maybe two lines, is like the smoke from a snuffed out candle, along with a desperate dream for safety and stability. Those lines are just really some of my favorite, because I think it really strikes, it really captures that helplessness, the desperation, as she calls it. Are there lines that you liked in particular? Please share them in the chat.
One of my favorite bits at the end, while folks are getting theirs in, and I'll scroll through this so you can see it once again. I love this part at the end, a forever fire burning with debt, burning with blood. So we see Molly using two poetic devices here with her language. We hear some alliteration, that repeating sound, forever fire, and we're hearing burning with blood, and also just getting that repetition, burning, burning, which adds emphasis, adds intensity, and also reminds us that this is an ongoing problem. We're repeating this over and over.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Hannah. And Julia's also added murderous monopoly, no Park Avenue, as lines that resonated with them. Thank you for sharing that, Julia. So let's move on to the next slide, but I really appreciated all of your feedback, and you've helped us have a really thoughtful conversation, not only about the poem and how it captures the emotions, but the global issue that it talks about. And I'm wondering, as we move on and start talking more about poetry and more about news, about your personal relationship with news, is most of the news you hear about positive or negative? So think about the news that you've been hearing recently, or even over the past couple of years. Do you feel like it's mostly positive, negative, or in between? You can share your responses in the chat. I love to hear a little bit from you. So Laura is saying that she's hearing that they're hearing mostly negative news. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to hold space for anybody else. Seems that Leah also agrees that the news can be really negative. And as you guys think about your relationship, Danielle also seeing a lot of negatives. Yeah, as you guys think about this and reflect in the chat, but people are trying to take positive things from it. Elena, thank you so much. And you're actually giving me a transition here, because poetry is a way to respond to news that can sometimes feel negative and scary. We experience, right, many feelings of outrage, anger, noticing the helplessness and the frustration in the story that we read. But the poem that Molly wrote was a way to talk about that story with the efficacy, right, of poetry, with the art form that really helps people connect to emotions. And it's a great way to respond to news. And I'm going to pass it off to Hannah, who's going to talk a little bit more about why we write poetry in response to news and why it's important for us to engage in the news.
Thank you so much for that, Joya. And that is exactly right. I know I feel a lot of what you were putting in the chat, that a lot of the news I encounter is negative. I can find positive news if I seek it out, but often I have to dig harder for it to be able to find that news. So a lot of the time, whether you are somebody who like turns on the news every day and tries to keep up with it, or if you're just hearing about it from other people, we really can't avoid the news in our lives. And it is important to stay informed about what's going on in our communities and in the world. But those can be really difficult emotions. So poetry is one way to process that for ourselves and also to create something useful for other people, to start a conversation and to add your own perspective into the kinds of news that we're hearing. So the point of all of this is not that we are all going to be writing poems about asylum seekers from Honduras in the United States. You're certainly welcome to write about that topic if it connects to you. But the point is just that we make choices every day about what we click on online, what we read, write, and talk about with other people, and that those choices change the way that we look at the world, the understanding that we have of our own communities, and what we might do to take action on these things. So my challenge for all of you as part of the project, this Fighting Words Poetry Workshop and contest, is to try to think about whose voices are you seeing a lot of in the news and whose voices are missing from that conversation. So how can you use your poetry to both uplift your own identity and perspective and opinions and ideas and beautiful language, but also reach out and uplift somebody else's voice at the same time? I'll share with you a few more examples of topics that other students have written about in the past for their Fighting Words poems. Here's an 8th grade student from Pennsylvania who wrote about the water crisis in Mexico City. So for those of you who are interested in climate change and the environment, there's some beautiful poems about environment on our site. It's the 5th grade student in Maryland who wrote about invasive species and food supplies in Bolivia. An 11th grade student in Indiana who wrote about disability rights and education in India. A 9th grade student in Connecticut who wrote about the political and economic protests taking place in Venezuela. And you can see that Miranda wrote in both Spanish and English. So if you're somebody who speaks and writes in multiple languages, you can definitely do that for this contest as well, whatever those languages may be. Here's a 10th grade student in Canada who wrote about the very familiar story of virtual learning during the pandemic. An 11th grade student in Indiana who wrote about transgender people's rights in Pakistan and in the United States. A 9th grade student in California who wrote about social media activism in Mexico. And a 6th grade student who wrote a really joyful poem about girls' empowerment in Bangladesh. So remember, you can uplift stories about problems, stories about joy, and also stories that hold both of those things at the same time. Here's what some of those poems look like when they're published on our website, including judges from comments from professional poets who judged the contest. And I definitely encourage you, when you receive these slides later to your emails, to check out some of the other contest winners from the last 3 years, because there's some amazing poems in there that might help you think about how you want to structure your poem or what kind of content you might want to explore. So get your inspiration from these other poets too. I also want to share with you how you can find news stories that are specifically interesting to you. We're going to do a little bit of writing practice and not too long with another couple of stories that Joya and I have chosen for us to work from today. And you'll have an option to vote among those once again. But after today's workshop, I encourage you all to think really deeply about what those global issues that matter to you are, and to seek out a news story that really speaks to you. There are a couple different ways that you can do that. The first link on this slide will take you to this page where you'll see the Fighting Words Poetry Contest link, and it has all the information you could need, including where to submit your poem in the end at this simple Google form, but also these suggested stories right here. So you might want to focus, if you're in grades 4 to 8, on stories for grades 6 and up and stories for grades 3 and up, and see if there's anything in here that sparks you as being really interesting, maybe something that's connected to you on a personal level and that you're already really passionate about, or maybe something new that you want to learn more about and explore through your poem. There is a second way that you can go if you don't see anything that's sparking you right there. You can also go to pulitzercenter.org/stories. And once you're here, you can sort through all of these stories. You'll see popping up here just whatever is most recent, but you can also sort through by the issue that you're most interested in. So thinking back to our earlier conversation about what you care about, you could find the most recent stories about the environment and climate change, about migration and refugees, LGBTQIA+ rights, racial justice, or many, many different issues that might be interesting to you. And you can also search by the country if you already know what place you want to read about as well. So I'm excited to see what kinds of news stories you are most interested in exploring for yourselves. But today, for our practice session, we're going to vote from among these 3. If you vote for the first one, we'll be taking a look at Ballet and Bullets, Dancing Despite Violence in Brazil. If you vote for the second one, we'll be taking a look at In Isolation, Abby Dreams, a 4th grade student's experience of the pandemic in California. And if you vote for number 3, we'll look at Down from the Mountains, Children Living Alone Without Their Parents in China. And it seems like our poll is not working for us on the webinar side, so I'm going to ask you to throw your choice into the chat. And I'm going to hold only 10 seconds for that. Just put a 1, a 2, or a 3 in there as quickly as you can. And we'll take a look at the one that has the most votes. Joy and I will do some tallying. So 10 seconds. Okay, we're cutting off our voting line now. And Joya, can you help me do a quick tally and see which group seems to have it?
I'm going to count the 3s and the 1s.
Perfect.
So it looks like 1 beat 3 at 5. What about 2?
In that case, it's going to be number 1. We'll be taking a look at Ballet and Bullets. And if that was not your choice, once again, you will have access to all of these slides later today. Right, so we're going to watch a short clip of Ballet and Bullets, just about 3 minutes, and then we'll read a couple of text passages from that news story. But while we're watching, I want to ask you to do something. You can either take out a sheet of paper, if you have one in front of you, and a pencil or a pen, or just open up a new window on your computer if that's easier for you. And what we're going to do is notice the words and phrases that jump out to us from this video and these text passages that capture the feeling of this story. So again, words and phrases, they could be as short as 1 word, could be as long as a sentence, that capture the feeling of this news story for you. And what we're doing here is forming a kind of word bank that we can ultimately use to structure our Fighting Words poems after watching this news story. So let's take a look at the first couple minutes of Ballet and Bullets, Dancing Out of the Favela. And favelas, if you're not familiar, are neighborhoods in Brazil at the outskirts of a city that tend to be poor and have a high crime rate.
Quando a gente está fazendo balé, às vezes dá tiro, a gente não tem pra onde correr e pra onde se esconder.
realmente arriscar a minha vida e até a vida das próprias meninas pelo treino. Quem vocês são?
Nós somos bailarinas.
De onde vocês vêm?
Do Morro do Adeus.
Pé 7.
Companhia que protege de manhã, à tarde e à noite, mas principalmente agora nesse dia.
Um tiroteio assustou moradores do Morro do Adeus, no Complexo do Alemão, foi essa noite. A polícia diz que foi um confronto ali entre traficantes rivais.
Ninguém pode gritar. Vamos no tempo.
Tu tava rolando por cima delas? Não tava rolando no chão, palhaça?
Ninguém morreu. Todo mundo aguentou todo mundo.
É muito difícil para uma menina da favela conquistar seus objetivos. Na idade delas, aqui de dentro da comunidade, que nós vemos que já estão grávidas, perdendo toda a sua infância, toda a sua adolescência, por conta de uma gravidez indesejada. Como já teve vezes de eu ter que cancelar o treino por causa dos tiroteios entre policiais, bandidos ou traficantes. Não tem proteção para as meninas.
Ela tá batendo no joelho, né?
Tá. Sacode, sacode.
So I'm going to stop the video right there, but definitely encourage you to watch the whole thing later if you're interested. There are about 15 more minutes to it, and you'll get to meet a lot more of the girls. So I'm curious to know, Joya, let's talk about the feeling of this news story. And you can feel free to share in the chat as well. Remember, we're writing down words and phrases that capture the feeling here. So what do you feel when you watch this story, Joya?
It's interesting because I felt so scared for them as I was watching. I felt a lot of fear, but at the same time, I loved watching how much they loved ballet. So I did feel some joy as well. Interesting to have both feelings at the same time.
Totally, yeah. And seeing both that fear, that sadness, and also like incredible determination here, right? So there's a lot of different feelings that we could be pulling out. So let's keep some of that in mind: the sadness, the fear, the joy, the determination, as we take a look at a few text passages, and keep in mind that we're pulling out words and phrases from this to build a word bank that reflects those feelings that you're experiencing as a result of this story. I'm going to read our first slide aloud, and I'll alternate with you, Joy, if that's cool with you. The story is called Ballet and Bullets, Dancing Out of the Favela, and it's written by Frederick Bernas and Ryan Hindi, who also made the video we watched. I do not speak Portuguese, so please excuse me. Na Ponta dos Pés, On Tiptoe, is a ballet project in the Alemão Favela complex in Rio de Janeiro. It's a brainchild of Tuani Nascimento, a 24-year-old dancer who represented Brazil at international events during a flourishing career that was abruptly cut short by lack of resources. Rather than letting her head drop, the setback strengthened Tuani's determination to help troubled communities through dance. In 2012, she started teaching classes in the Morro do Adeus favela, where she lives. It's one of the roughest parts of Alemão, which is currently at the center of a feud between rival drug cartels. And folks, could we get some examples at this point of some words and phrases that are popping out to us already? As something that we might be able to include in our poems is capturing a feeling here. I'm looking at the power, the impact of a really short phrase like abruptly cut short.
Mary shared, rather than letting her head drop. I love that phrase because I think it also captures her determination. Thank you for sharing that.
Definitely. Wonderful examples. So keep those in mind as we move forward with this text piece and continue writing down what's jumping out to you.
Many students in Tuani's group of girls, aged 4 to 15, come from families caught up in drug wars and afflicted by the chronic crisis of opportunity that exemplifies urban poverty across Brazil. With an average of 30 incidents of weapons fire every day in Rio, last year saw 6,590 deaths. Many of the victims were innocent citizens caught in the crossfire. Intensifying violence in Alameo has increased Tuani's motivation to find support for the construction of the community center, which will give her girls a safe space to dance and study.
Thank you, Joya. I'm looking at that line, caught in the crossfire. That's really beautiful to me. Anything else jumping out to you, Joya?
I love the words support and community because I noticed that those words really exemplified just a small snippet that we saw, the way those women and those girls were supporting each other.
Lily shared safe space. I love that. Thank you, Lily. And continue writing those words and phrases down on our last slide here. After the challenges of her own career, Tuani knows her students can't all become pro ballerinas, but the discipline she teaches will transcend the act of learning to dance, setting them up with a better chance to escape the bitter cycle of hardship, which swallows up so many young lives in Brazil. I'm going to leave this slide up for another 10 seconds in case you're copying anything down here. Beautiful. So I hope that everybody has been able to find at least a couple words or phrases that pop out to them as capturing the words and definitely capturing the words, but also capturing the feeling of this news story. And if you haven't found them yet, also take a look at those suggestions from your classmates and other folks in this webinar together, and think about using some of those for our next activity. So now it's time for us to get a little bit of writing practice. I told you we're not going to write any epic poems today. Instead, what we're going to focus on is getting down one line of poetry. So what I want to ask you to do is take a look at your word bank now, all of those words and phrases that you've been writing down, and choose one or maybe two or three favorite words, phrases, or lines that you've already written down. And then we're going to form those words or fragments into complete lines. So let's take a look at how Molly did that in our example earlier. Molly took just very short words and phrases from the news story that we explored together. She said, swiftly denied, request for asylum drifts out the window. So instead of just saying swiftly denied, make that into a full line of poetry by adding your own perspective, your own thoughts. Swiftly denied, request for asylum drifts out the window. So we're going to take just 3 minutes now together to take a look at your list, come up with one or more favorite words or phrases that stick out to you, and form that into a complete line of poetry. I'm going to do the same thing with you. We'll come back together in 3 minutes and we will share in the chat what we have, whatever it may be, as just a final exercise in creating a big, messy, beautiful group poem about the story we explored together. So one short example, if you're feeling stuck, remember their group was called On Tiptoe. So you might take On Tiptoe and write, on tiptoe, a girl can reach any dream. One more example. Take about 30 more seconds. And if you're already ready, feel free to start sharing in the chat as well. See a beautiful example from Bella, crying, but nobody died. Everyone's okay. Beautiful. Right, folks, let's take the next 90 seconds to throw whatever you have into the chat now. If you've written a full line, if you've written a whole bunch of lines like Julia, that's great, throw them in. But also, if all you have are a couple words or phrases that you really liked from the documentary that we watched, that's totally okay too. So just throw your lines, your words, your phrases into the chat. Let's make ourselves a big, messy group poem that we can read out loud together to end our time. And you are very welcome to share that with, again, all panelists and attendees. But if you'd like to be anonymous today and not have your name associated with what you've written, you can also send it just to all panelists if you prefer. I'm going to share mine in the chat as well. Love to see these coming in. Thank you. Keep them coming, keep them coming. We'll hold another minute for this. Right. And with that, please keep them coming in the chat if you have anything more that you would like to share, because it will take a moment for us to get to the very bottom. But let's start reading our beautiful group poem aloud. We have, crying, but nobody died. Everyone's okay. We are ballerinas, a rival drug cartel. Shake it, our cycle of hardship is na ponto dos pés. Rather than letting her head down, she wouldn't let herself be caught in the crossfire. Beautiful, joyous movement, punctuated by sound. She never let her head drop, an innocent citizen caught in the crossfire. She made a safe space, away from the hardship that swallows. Booming shots split my ears. Help communities with expression and art. To transcend, we train. We care for our community. We dream. So we can't see your faces right now, but please give yourselves a round of snaps, a round of virtual applause for the beautiful things that you have made in just a very short period of time. Imagine what you will make when you sit down and spend a little bit longer with a story that you love, a story that you connect with on a personal level, and create your own poem. I want to thank you all so much for spending this time with us today and encourage all of you to please share with us your poems that you write as part of the Fighting Words Poetry Contest before that May 15th deadline. We can't wait to read about all of the important issues that you care about and to read your beautiful words that we've gotten just a little bit of a preview of today. So take care, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye, folks.